I had the canoe halfway down the front steps when she pulled into the driveway next door, and the look on her face was the kind you give someone who is clearly making a decision they haven't fully thought through. Margot rolled down her window and leaned out with her sunglasses pushed up into her hair. You're not seriously putting that thing on your truck. I'm seriously putting this thing on my truck. She looked at the canoe, then at my pickup, then at the pile of gear bags sitting on the lawn like I'd emptied my entire life onto the grass. Tent, cooler, fishing rod case, a rolled-up sleeping bag that had seen better years, 2 plastic bins of food I'd packed at midnight because I couldn't sleep. "Where are you even going?" she asked. North. North is not a destination, Trent. It is when you don't want to come back on a schedule. Margot had moved in next door about 14 months ago. Bought the place after her divorce went through, which I only knew because the previous owner, an old guy named Bert, told me when he was hauling the last of his stuff out. Said the new owner seemed nice but quiet. He wasn't wrong. For the first 6 months, Margot and I barely talked beyond the wave from the driveway level. He kept her yard neat. I kept mine acceptable. She had a small herb garden along the side of her house that she tended every evening after work. I had a rust patch on my truck that I kept meaning to fix and never did. She was older than me. 41, maybe 42. I never asked directly. She had dark hair that she usually wore pulled back, and this way of standing with her arms crossed that made it look like she was permanently deciding whether something was worth her time. She worked at the hospital in town. Not a doctor. Something administrative. She never talked about it much, which told me everything. That morning I was supposed to be leaving alone. 2 weeks off. First real time away in almost 3 years. I'd been planning this trip in my head since February, mapping routes through northern Ontario, finding campsites along lakes I'd only seen on Google Maps, telling myself that if I just got far enough from Sudbury for long enough, I'd come back feeling like a different version of myself. Or at least a version that didn't wake up every morning already tired. I said it because I say stupid things when I'm nervous and excited at the same time. Come with me. It was a joke. Obviously a joke. You don't invite your neighbor on a 2-week canoe and camping trip at 7 in the morning while you're standing there in a wrinkled flannel with your hair going in 3 directions. Margot didn't laugh though. She turned the engine off, sat there for a second, then said, "Okay." I stopped moving. "What?" "Give me 20 minutes. Margot, I wasn't 20 minutes. She was already getting out of the car. At her. I stood there holding the bow of the canoe against my hip, watching her walk up her front steps and disappear inside. And I genuinely did not know if she was messing with me. The smart move was to finish loading and leave before this became awkward. That's what a reasonable person would do. I waited. 18 minutes later she came back out with a backpack, a rolled sleeping bag under one arm, and a pair of hiking boots tied together by the laces and hanging from her hand. She'd changed into jeans and a gray zip-up, and she looked like someone who had made a decision about 6 layers deeper than the one I'd offered. "Margot, are you serious right now?" She tossed the boots into the truck bed. "Do I look like I'm kidding? What about work? I've 3 weeks of vacation I haven't touched. What about your house?" "It's a house, Trent. It's not going anywhere." I looked at her for another beat. She looked back, steady, not smiling yet, but not uncertain either. "Why?" I asked. That was when her expression shifted. Something underneath the composure cracked open for just a second. She said, "Because if I spend one more Saturday reorganizing a closet that doesn't need reorganizing, I'm going to lose my mind." That was enough. She climbed into the passenger seat and pulled the door shut, and the truck that had felt like mine for 3 years suddenly felt like something else. Her bag at her feet, the faint smell of whatever lotion she used mixing with the cedar air freshener I'd hung from the mirror 2 months ago. Her knee close to the center console. Her presence filling up space I hadn't realized was empty. We hit the highway heading north on the Trans-Canada, and neither of us said much for the first half hour. Not uncomfortable silence. More like the kind where 2 people are independently processing the fact that they've just done something impulsive and are waiting to see if it becomes a mistake. Margot was the one who broke it. She reached over and turned the radio down and said, "So do you actually know how to use that canoe, or is it decorative?" "I've used it twice. Twice. Maybe once and a half. The second time it flipped." She closed her eyes slowly. "Great." By the time we stopped for gas near Perry Sound, something had loosened between us. She came out of the station with 2 coffees, a bag of ketchup chips, and a chocolate bar she broke in half without asking. She made fun of the way I folded my map, I pointed out that her phone had lost signal 20 minutes ago, so maybe the map deserved more respect. She said the map looked like it had been through a war. I said it had character. We got back on the road and she started telling me about the apartment she'd lived in right after the divorce. A basement unit in a duplex off Regent Street, where the upstairs tenants had a dog that barked at exactly 11:15 every single night. She said she'd lie there in the dark listening to it and thinking, this is what starting over sounds like. A dog that hates the same time of night I do. I laughed harder than I should have at that. She noticed and smiled into her coffee. By early afternoon, we'd turned off the main highway onto a smaller road that wound through dense bush and past lakes that flashed silver through the trees. I had a campsite marked on the map near a lake I couldn't pronounce, and the plan was to get there before dark, set up, and spend the next morning on the water. The plan lasted about 40 more minutes. The temperature gauge started climbing while we were going up a long grade. I saw it first but didn't say anything, hoping it would settle. Didn't. Margot glanced at the dash, then at me. Trent, I see it. The needle is… I see it, Margot. Steam started curling from under the hood just as I found a pull-off. Gravel crunched. The engine made a sound like a cough that didn't clear, and then everything went quiet except for the wind in the trees and the ticking of hot metal. We both sat there. So, she said. Strong start. I dropped my head against the steering wheel. Please don't. I'm just observing. I got out and opened the hood and a wall of heat hit me in the face. Coolant had sprayed across the engine. I could see where one of the hoses had softened and the clamp had slipped. Fixable, probably. But not fun, and not fast. Margot came around and stood beside me, looking into the engine bay like she was reading a menu she didn't understand. Give me the optimistic version first, she said. It's a minor inconvenience. And the real version, the hose is shot and the clamp is loose and I need to figure out if I even have the right stuff to patch it. She nodded. Okay, what do you need? That caught me off guard. I'd expected a sigh or an I told you so, or at least the look. Instead, she just rolled up her sleeves and said, tell me what to hand you. For the next hour and a half, we worked on the side of that road. Me under the hood, her passing tools, holding things in place, pouring water when I needed it. Black flies were brutal. The sun was directly on us. My hands were greasy and my back was soaking through my shirt. At one point, she held the flashlight steady for 10 straight minutes so I could see into a gap behind the block. And when I finally leaned back and wiped my face, she said, you have coolant on your forehead. It makes you look very competent. Thank you. You're welcome. Are we going to die out here? Probably not. That's less reassuring than you think. When I finally got the clamp tightened and refilled the coolant reservoir with the spare jug I'd packed, I started the engine and held my breath. It idled rough for a few seconds, then smoothed out. Not perfect, but alive. Margot handed me the last of the water. So what's the verdict? I looked up the road, looked back at her. Both of us covered in grime, bitten up, standing in the middle of nowhere with a truck that might or might not make it through the night. The verdict is we drive like two people who just learned humility. She grinned. That is a significant change from how you drove this morning. We made it to the lake by late evening. Not the one I'd planned. A different one, smaller, deeper into the bush, with a campsite that was really just a flat patch of ground near the water, with a fire ring made of stones. No one else around. The lake was perfectly still and reflecting the last of the light, in a way that made everything feel suspended. We set up the tent together. It went badly. I'd practiced it once in my backyard, and apparently blocked out how frustrating the poles were. Margot tried reading the instructions by headlamp and said things like, this diagram was drawn by someone who hates campers. We got it up eventually, crooked, but up. Dinner was canned chili, heated on my camp stove, eaten out of mugs because I'd forgotten bowls. Margot held hers with both hands and looked out at the lake and didn't say anything for a while. The fire crackled. Loons called from somewhere across the water. The sky was doing that thing it does up north, where it turns colors you don't believe are real. I needed this, she said. Quiet. Not to me, exactly. More like she was saying it to confirm it to herself. Yeah, I said. Me too. That was the night the weather turned. We'd been sitting by the fire maybe another 20 minutes when the wind shifted hard and fast and the sky went from clear to heavy in what felt like seconds. The first drops hit the lake surface in big fat circles, and then it opened up like someone had pulled a plug. We scrambled. Everything happened at once. I grabbed the food bin. She yanked the chairs toward the truck. I tripped on a tent stake and nearly went down. She caught the cooler lid right before the wind took it. Rain hammered us flat in under a minute. By the time we got into the tent, we were both completely soaked. The inside was chaos. Wet gear, wet clothes, wet sleeping bags because I hadn't zipped the tent properly, and rain had pooled on one side. Margot sat on the ground pad with water running down her face and her hair stuck flat against her head and said, "This is magnificent. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I'm having the time of my life, Trent. You're sitting in a puddle. I've never felt more alive." She was laughing, full on, shaking, can't stop laughing, the kind that happens when everything is so wrong it wraps back around to funny. And it got me, too. Both of us soaked and freezing and laughing in a crooked tent, while rain pounded the nylon so loud we had to shout. We barely slept. The rain didn't let up until close to 4 in the morning, and by then the tent had that sticky damp feeling that makes everything uncomfortable. Margot stole most of the dry blanket and denied it completely. "I'm barely using any of it." She was wrapped in it like a burrito. In the morning everything outside was dripping and washed out and beautiful in that raw northern way. Mist on the lake. Everything smelling like pine and wet earth. I made coffee on the stove and it tasted terrible and she drank it anyway. Took a sip, made a face, took another sip. "No," she said, then kept drinking. The next 2 days were like that. Nothing went smoothly, and somehow each disaster made the trip better instead of worse. We took a wrong turn because I was listening to her tell me about the time she accidentally set off the fire alarm at the hospital during a board meeting and had to evacuate 200 people. And by the time we realized we'd gone 40 kilometers off route on a logging road, the pavement had turned to dirt and the dirt had turned to ruts. I should have been frustrated, but the road ended at a ridge overlooking a river valley that stretched out wide and green and completely empty. No signs, no other people, just the sound of water somewhere far below, and the two of us standing there with a bag of trail mix from a gas station, looking at something that felt like it belonged only to us. Margot bumped my arm with her shoulder. "See, your terrible navigation works." That was navigation. It was not. Still counts. That night we parked on a flat stretch near a creek and ate the last of the decent food. Pasta with sauce from a jar, cooked on the camp stove while mosquitoes tried to carry us away. It was quiet out there. Deep quiet. The kind where you hear your own breathing and every small sound in the bush feels closer than it probably is. I was cleaning up when Margot froze. She put her hand on my arm and pointed past me toward the tree line. "Don't move," she whispered. I looked. At first, nothing. Then I saw it. Something dark and solid moving near the edge of the firelight. Low. Not huge, but deliberate. A black shape nosing at the bag where we'd left the bread. My heart went straight to my throat. Margot's fingers tightened on my arm hard enough that I felt each one separately. "Bear?" she breathed. "I don't know. Maybe raccoon. Big raccoon." "Trent, that is not a raccoon." I reached slowly for the pot and banged it against the truck fender. Loud, metallic. The shape jerked, hesitated, then crashed off into the brush, heavy enough to snap branches. We stood there in the silence after it, both of us breathing harder than we needed to. Margot let out a long exhale and then started laughing. That ragged, exhausted, half-terrified laugh. "We are going to die in the woods," she said. We are not going to die in the woods. We are absolutely going to die in the woods, and they will find our bones next spring." She was still holding my arm. I noticed it the way you notice something that's been there a while, but only just registered. Her hand. My arm. The space between us that wasn't really space anymore. When she finally let go, it was slow. Slower than it needed to be. And she didn't step back right away. Stood there in the dim light from the dying fire. Both filthy, both tired, both smiling at each other like the trip had quietly become something neither of us had planned for or knew how to name. The night I understood how deep I was in, we were at a motel outside Wawa. The kind of place with a blinking sign and carpet that hadn't been replaced since the 90s and a shower that took 4 minutes to get warm. We'd been rained on again that afternoon, and after 2 hours of pretending we didn't care, Margot looked at me from the passenger seat and said flatly, "I want walls, fair, and hot water, reasonable, and a bed that is not the ground." I found the motel. The room smelled like pine cleaner and the heater rattled, and the ceiling had a water stain shaped like Lake Huron. But when Margot came out of the bathroom after a long shower, wearing an oversized hoodie with her hair damp and her face clean, for the first time in days, the room felt smaller. Not in a bad way. In the way where you suddenly can't ignore that there's only one bed and the other person is sitting on it. We ate gas station sandwiches because the diner down the road had already closed. Margot sat cross-legged near the headboard picking at her food, and I sat on the edge pretending to watch the hockey highlights on mute. You've been weird for the last hour, she said. I haven't. You've barely looked at me. I looked at her. That was a mistake, because she was looking right back with that steady, cut-through-everything expression she had. The one that made it feel like she could see whatever I was trying to keep behind my face. Margot, Trent! I rubbed the back of my neck. This stopped feeling like a camping trip a while ago. She didn't answer right away. She set the sandwich wrapper aside and pulled one knee up and rested her chin on it, watching me. Then she said, I know, okay. Good. That somehow makes me more nervous. A real smile, small but real. She shifted closer, not dramatically, just enough that the distance closed by half. You think I got in your truck because I wanted to see trees? I thought maybe you were having a crisis. I was, she said. You were just there at the right moment. Quiet after that. Not uncomfortable. Full. Then she said, somewhere between the engine dying and the bear and sleeping in a wet tent and eating canned chili for the third time, I stopped thinking about my old life. And I don't mean I forgot about it. I mean I stopped wanting it. I turned toward her fully. Is that a good thing? It is when the old version felt like sleepwalking through my own house. That hit me in a place I hadn't protected. Margot never said things to sound dramatic. She said things because they were true. And when she did, they stayed with you like a bruise. She told me more then. About the years since the divorce. How she'd gotten so good at routine that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be surprised by a day. Wake up, work, groceries, herb garden, glass of wine, bed, eat. Nothing bad. Nothing good. Just the same safe loop until she couldn't tell if she was living or just maintaining. I kept the house perfect, she said. Every surface clean, every plant watered, every bill paid on time. And one morning I stood in my kitchen and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt anything about any of it. I didn't have a good response. I just said, you don't seem like that person with me. Margot looked at me for a long moment. And then she leaned forward and kissed me. It wasn't rushed. That was what stayed with me. After all those days of moving and fixing and scrambling, that moment was completely still. Her hand on the side of my face, the sound of the heater rattling, rain against the window, everything else falling away. After we lay there in the quiet, and she rested her head on my chest, and I stared at the water stain on the ceiling and thought about how 2 weeks ago I didn't even know what her voice sounded like inside a room. Morning was harder. Not between us. Between us and math. I sat at the little table by the window, going through what we had left. Gas money, food budget, the motel charge that had eaten more than I wanted to admit. I did the numbers twice, because the first time made my stomach hurt. Margot came out toweling her hair and read my face instantly. How bad? We need to be smart from here. She sat down beside me. No panic, no blame. Show me. I showed her. We cut out everything extra. Free campsites only. Cheapest gas. Food from grocery stores, nothing from restaurants. I hated admitting I'd miscalculated. Months of planning and I'd still underestimated what it cost to keep 2 people moving. Margot slid some bills from her wallet onto the table. No, yes. I invited you. And I came, she said. This is both of us now. I started to argue. She put her hand over mine on the table and held it there. Trent, stop trying to carry everything by yourself. That's not how this works anymore. I should have felt embarrassed. Instead, it did something worse. It made me think about things I had no business thinking about yet. Not just the trip. Not just another night beside her. Something after. A version of life that included her in it, past the point where the highway brought us home. We still fought that afternoon when the truck started making a new sound and I pulled over too hard, and she told me that pulling over aggressively was not a mechanical solution. I said I had it under control. She said my version of under control involved a lot of swearing and staring. I said staring was part of the diagnostic process. She said the diagnostic process seemed to be mostly hoping. 5 minutes later we were laughing because she was completely right, and that was when I knew it. This wasn't just chemistry built on sunsets and being far from home. Every time something broke down, every time something went wrong, we moved toward the problem together. No scorekeeping. No resentment. No, I told you so. Just both of us facing the same direction. That night, parked on a bluff above a lake, so still it looked like glass. With the doors open and cool air coming in off the water, Margot leaned against my shoulder and said, I'm starting to hate the idea of this ending. I didn't answer right away, because the honest response felt too heavy for the moment. Then I said, yeah, me too. And for the rest of that evening, with the road still stretching ahead and home still far enough away to pretend it didn't exist, the truck didn't feel like a vehicle anymore. It felt like a life we had slipped into sideways, without planning it, without asking permission. And neither of us wanted to be the first to call it temporary. The last stretch south was the hardest part, which didn't seem fair after everything else. By then we had a rhythm that ran on its own. Margot handed me coffee before I reached for it. I checked the tire pressure at every stop without being asked. We packed faster, talked in shorthand, knew when the other one needed noise and when they needed quiet. Should have made the drive home easy. Instead it made every kilometer feel heavier. Because now we both knew what was waiting. Not disaster, just the old version. Her driveway. My driveway. The same street where this whole thing had started as a joke neither of us really meant. The truck acted up again about 2 hours south of Sudbury. A shudder through the frame. A grinding sound underneath that I felt in my hands on the wheel. I pulled over and killed the engine before it could get worse. Margot stared through the windshield. Of course. I laughed once. Yeah, of course. I slid under the truck on the mat I kept behind the seat. Dust and gravel in my face. The smell of oil and hot metal. Margot crouched nearby, passing wrenches, holding things steady, asking when to ask and staying quiet when not to. It was a bracket, loose bolts and a belt that had shifted just enough to complain without fully breaking. My hands were black by the time I got out. She handed me the water bottle. You look terrible. Thank you. You're welcome. I drank half of it, looked at the truck, looked at the road heading south, looked at her. We can still make it. She nodded, but she wasn't looking at the truck. She was looking at me with the same expression she'd had in that motel room when we both stopped pretending. We got back on the road as the sun started dropping. Neither of us talked much. Not because anything was wrong, Hubert. Because what was between us had gotten too big for small talk, and the question we'd been keeping just ahead of us the whole drive was finally right there in the cab, sitting between us like a third passenger. Was this only real because we were moving? When we turned onto our street in Sudbury, it hit me like a wall. Her house on the left, mine on the right, same lawns, same mailboxes, same neighborhood that had felt so small the morning I left. I parked in my driveway and cut the engine. Silence. After that, many days on the road felt almost violent. Margot didn't open her door. Neither did I. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel and said, so I guess this is the part where we go back to being neighbors. I hated every word as it came out. Margot was quiet long enough that I finally turned to look at her. She had one hand on her backpack, but she hadn't picked it up. Her eyes were on both houses through the windshield. Then she said, I don't want that. I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. She let out a breath. I mean it. I don't want to go inside, unpack, and pretend this was just some wild thing I did before going back to watering my herbs and eating dinner alone. My pulse was so loud it felt ridiculous. Margot, let me finish, she said, and there was a shake in her voice. Not much, just enough. I left because I was disappearing inside my own life. Somewhere on this trip, between the breakdowns and the rain and the bear and the terrible coffee, and you swearing at your own truck like it owed you money, I started feeling like myself again. Not the managed version, not the one who keeps everything neat. Me. She looked at me. Straight, no armor. I couldn't find anything clever. All I had was the truth. Then stay. It came out rougher than I meant it to. Margot held my eyes for another second. Then she gave this small, almost disbelieving laugh. Like she'd been waiting the whole drive home for one clear reason not to walk back into the old pattern. She reached down, picked up her backpack, and instead of opening her door, she set it behind my seat. Just like that. No speech. No drawn-out hesitation. A choice. I stared at the bag, then at her. That's it? She smiled. That's it. Would you have the guts to walk away from your old life if someone gave you the reason? Let me know in the comments. You're really not going inside? She looked at her house, then back at me. I am home.